In part 1, I tried to include a wide variety of stadiums from different countries and different sports. But as expected, there were a ton of suggestions in the comments of other stadiums with a spectacular view that I didn't include. So here are 20 more stadiums with a spectacular view suggested by you. Truist Field. Charlotte is one of the biggest cities in the US without a Major League Baseball team. But at Truist Field, even though it has a capacity of around 10,000, there could potentially be a Major League-sized crowd watching live. Not from the seats, but from the skyscrapers that overlook the field. They're perhaps not as majestic as mountains, but it's still an impressive sight. Michie Stadium. When you're sitting right next to a reservoir that's elevated above the Hudson River, you should probably get a decent view. And you do. Not just of the water, but also the campus seems as if it's been just plonked in the middle of the wilderness. There are more trees than you can poke a stick at. Don't do that though, these trees have spent decades in the military academy. It's technically true. Victoria Stadium. Being located in Gibraltar, the tiny British overseas territory basically guarantees you a view of the Rock of Gibraltar, which is probably the world's most famous rock. What about me? Oh yeah, good point, the second most famous rock in the world then. Oh, piss off mate, what about me? Yeah, but unlike Uluru, you can actually climb it. And you get a great view of the coast of Africa from up there. Also, there's monkeys in Gibraltar. So technically you could be standing in the UK while looking at Africa and high-fiving a monkey. There is also a stadium across the border in Spain that has a decent view of the rock. Speaking of bordering with Spain, Portugal has a ton of incredible stadiums, but none quite as unique as the Estádio de Braga. That was carved into the side of a hill on the site of a former quarry. The rock face remains fully exposed, but it's not just that the spectators get a view of. The other side offers an expansive view across the valley. This has to be one of the most extraordinary stadiums in the world. Sun Bowl. Another one carved into the rocks, but that's about the only thing they have in common. The Sun Bowl actually offers an international view. Yep, from some seats you can see all the way to Mexico. It's Ciudad Juarez, one of the murder capitals of the world, but also where burritos originated, so that balances things out. Yarrow Stadium. It's another one of those rugby-cricket hybrid stadiums that they have in New Zealand, although definitely more of a rugby stadium. The design's quite interesting, it has grass terraces, which is not something you see too often nowadays. The view is of a fairly distant Mount Taranaki, so it's not quite as imposing as others you'll see in this video, but still quite idyllic. Pokhara Rangasala. Now that name has a certain ring to it. Nepal isn't known for stadiums, but it's certainly known for mountains. In fact, I'm not sure there's any flat land in the country other than the stadiums. But to the north are some of the highest mountains in the world if you don't mind. Bobby Dodd Stadium. We're back to the man-made marvels with this one. The lopsided stadium makes the most of its proximity to downtown Atlanta by offering, I'd say, around a third of the spectators an unobstructed view of the skyline. It's pretty spectacular, especially at night. Stadium Cantrida. Much like Estádio de Braga, it was built on the site of a former quarry, which left it with this cliff on one side of the ground. But the star of the show is of course the ocean view. The Adriatic Sea to be Pacific. To be honest, sitting atop the cliff is probably the best seat in the house, and it's not in the house. Smith's Ballpark. As we've discussed before, there are a ton of stadiums in Utah with a similar view. But the good thing about this ballpark is that the trees beyond the outfield block out a view of any of the buildings or roads in the background. So the view that you're left with consists entirely of nature. I love these trees in particular. I've noticed that they only tend to grow around stadiums. It must be the irrigation or something. Oh, what the hey, let's include another stadium in Utah. Rice-Eccles Stadium. I feel like I have to include this stadium after Lavelle Edwards Stadium was included in the previous video. it does have a very similar view. The mountains are about the same size and a similar distance away, but the backdrop is just not quite as dramatic as BYU's. The stadium itself might be a tad better, however. Damn it, forgot to look up the pronunciation. Oh well. Estadio da Gavia. Although the stadium itself is a little run down and rudimentary, Rio is perhaps the most naturally beautiful city in the world. And not only do you get a view of the surrounding mountains, but look up there. Can you see it? It's the Big Jesus Man. Sorry Notre Dame, touchdown Jesus is no match for Big Jesus Man. Galle Cricket Ground. In the last video we had a cricket stadium with a view of a castle, but this time it's a view of a fort. The Galle Fort, first built by the Portuguese, is actually so close to the field that some spectators watch the match from up there instead of entering the stadium, which makes sense because it also gives you a great view of the ocean. Stadium Bowl. If you recognize this place, then maybe you went to Stadium High School, or even more likely you've seen the film 10 Things I Hate About You. The oddly shaped stadium overlooks Commencement Bay, and is itself overlooked by a rather extravagant building that's part of the Stadium High School. I wasn't joking about the name, the school's actually named after the stadium. And while we're in Washington, of course I have to include Husky Stadium, which not only is a pretty good looking stadium in its own right, but they like to call it the greatest setting in college football. It overlooks Lake Washington and has a view of some mountains in the distance, Mount Rainier being one of them. It's worth mentioning that Husky Ballpark probably has an even better view of the iconic mountain. Monte Carlo Country Club. If you lob up to this slice of tennis lovers' paradise, you might be surprised to learn that it's not actually in Monte Carlo. It's just barely outside of Monaco's borders, in France proper. It still serves as the home of the Monte Carlo Masters. I don't really have to explain the views, every direction you look it's pretty stunning. Wynn Stadium. The ground's known for rugby league, but it could also double as a surfing stadium if such a thing exists. Only a grass berm separates the field from the beach. Some seats barely have a view of the ocean, but if you're sitting in the upper tier, it's pretty magnificent. Some spectators even get a view of the nearby lighthouse. Clagon Park. Okay, we're pushing the limits of what can be called a stadium, but it does have one proper grandstand, albeit very small, so it counts. It's nestled amongst some beautiful Scottish mountains. Okay, that one you see there is more of a hill, but if you walk up it you'll be looking directly at the UK's highest mountain, Ben Nevis. I can hear the Nepalese viewers laughing. Yes, it's not of Himalayan proportions, in fact someone brought a piano up there once, but it's still pretty majestic. Rose Bowl. You might think that college football is overrepresented in this video, but they typically have very little roof coverage, which allows for a much better view of the surrounds. And the Rose Bowl's surrounds are pretty easy on the eye. Pretty much everyone in the stadium gets a view of the San Gabriel Mountains, or at least the adjacent hills. Red Bull Ring. Now it's not really a stadium, but a couple of viewers suggested it and there's no harm in including motorsports venues. This track has some stunning views of the Styrian Alps, and given that the track is an irregular shape, you can have pretty much any view that you'd like. It's very tranquil. Other than... yeah. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, have a good one.